I hadn't planned on coming back. Not for Christmas. Not for anything. But when the envelope arrived, heavy cardstock, wax seal, my full name written in my father's clean, mechanical hand, I paused. Dinner at the Morehouse. 7 p.m. Sharp. Christmas Eve. No note. No. We'd love to see you. Just an address I hadn't visited in almost 9 years. I showed it to no one, folded it once, and stuck it in my coat pocket for 2 weeks before making the mistake of looking at it again. Now I was here, driving past snow-covered fields and barns with tin roofs sagging under time, past the rusted, "Welcome to Elridge" sign, population 3, 127. Nothing had changed, and somehow that unsettled me more than anything else could have. The Morehouse still stood like a photograph that hadn't been updated. White pillars, perfectly trimmed hedges, a wreath on every window. Norman Rockwell's dream frozen in place. I parked behind a black Escalade Benz, probably, and sat for a moment before killing the engine. The porch lights glowed soft yellow, and I could already hear muffled laughter through the door. My fingers hovered over the keys before I pocketed them. My father didn't believe in doorbells, so I knocked. The door opened almost instantly. Ethan. My father's voice was the same. Even tone. No smile. Just that flat stare that said, "You showed up." Huh. He stepped aside without another word. The warmth of the house hit me first. Then the smell. Cinnamon. Pine. Ham. Christmas. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. In the living room, my aunt and uncle looked up from wine glasses and half-hearted small talk. My cousin Ben sat by the fireplace, already loosened tie and whiskey in hand. He stood and gave me a grin like we were best friends who hadn't missed a beat. "Well, well, look what the snow dragged in." "Hey, Ben," I said, keeping my coat on. My father disappeared down the hallway without saying another word. It was civil, technically. But that house had always had a way of making me feel like an intruder in my own story. This time wasn't any different. I wasn't sure why I was there, but I knew one thing. Already something about this year was off. And not just the invitation. Dinner was served at exactly 7 p.m., just like the invitation promised. Everything was pristine linen napkins folded into sharp triangles, name cards in gold, cursive, wine already poured. My seat was next to Ben, across from my father. Of course. He didn't look up when I sat down, just cut his roast and kept chewing like this was any other Thursday night, and not the first time I'd been at his table in nearly a decade. Across from me, Aunt Carol kept glancing my way, like she wanted to ask something but hadn't figured out how to start. Next to her, Uncle Greg stared into his wine like it might answer for him. Ben nudged me. "Still drinking bourbon? Or did the city turn you into a craft beer guy?" He said it like a joke, but something lingered behind his smile. "Bourbon," I replied, and he filled my glass. "Welcome home," he said, clinking his own. I didn't respond. Halfway through dinner, my father laughed at something Uncle Greg said, but it felt too loud, too sharp. I looked around the table. People smiled on cue, but the warmth was missing. Like everyone was rehearsing lines for a play they didn't want to be in. Ben kept talking, mostly about nothing real estate markets. A boat he wanted to buy. Some startup he was thinking of investing in. Too smooth. Too eager. He kept checking my expression like he wanted me to notice how normal he was being. At one point, my father refilled his own wine, something he never did. The bottle trembled slightly in his hand. His knuckles were pale, tight around the glass. He didn't say much to me, but he kept watching. Not openly, not directly, but every time I looked away, I felt it. A glance, a flicker, like he was checking to make sure I was still there. By dessert, the room felt thinner. Everyone laughed a little louder, drank a little faster. Even the fire seemed too controlled, burning clean and quiet like it knew how to behave. I stared down at my plate, untouched pie congealing beside a perfect dollop of whipped cream. My father cleared his throat. I looked up. He was staring straight at me. Then, just under his breath, almost too soft to hear. You weren't supposed to be here. The glasses rose slowly. Carol's voice was tremulous but clear. To family, she said, holding her wine aloft like it might stop the walls from closing in. To tradition. A few half-hearted murmurs followed. Ben chimed in with exaggerated enthusiasm. Aunt Carol dabbed the corner of her eye like it was all too touching. I lifted my glass with the rest, the bourbon amber under the chandelier light, and glanced across the table just as my father's lips moved again. You weren't supposed to be here, he said, barely audible. No one else seemed to hear either. Maybe they pretended not to. My hand froze mid-air. His voice hadn't cracked, hadn't wavered. It wasn't anger or surprise. It was disappointment, calculation, like I'd walked into a room that had already been locked from the inside. I didn't lower my glass. I didn't say a word. The room didn't exactly go silent, but something shifted. Aunt Carol set her fork down too hard. Ben stopped mid-laugh, the sound snagging in his throat. My uncle coughed into his napkin like that might fill the space. My father looked down at his plate. Didn't say another word. I glanced around the table. No one made eye contact. The toast moved forward mechanically. People sipped, murmured vague affirmations, gratitude, peace, whatever they thought they were supposed to say. I kept my glass raised, not drinking. My mind felt split open, trying to process what he'd just said. Not what he said. Exactly, I heard that part clearly. But why? Not supposed to be here. Like my presence was an error. A glitch in a plan he hadn't shared. Something about that sentence scratched at the base of my skull like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. And the worst part? He wasn't surprised I'd heard him. He didn't flinch. He just kept eating, eyes on his roast like it owed him something. When I finally lowered my glass, I realized my hand was shaking. Just slightly. Enough for the bourbon to ripple in the crystal. Ben was watching me. Eyes narrowed, something unreadable tightening the corners of his mouth. He opened it like he might say something, then thought better of it. The moment passed, but it left a crack behind. A seam in the room that didn't exist before. Ben was the first to speak. Loud. Too loud. So, he said, clapping his hands together and nearly toppling his water glass. Did I tell you guys the one about the squirrel, the priest, and the yoga retreat? It was nonsense. A story he clearly made up on the spot. All shifting tones and exaggerated gestures, and everyone leaned into it like it was the rope pulling them out of the pit. Aunt Carol chuckled nervously. Uncle Greg offered a tired smile. Even the cousins at the far end of the table nodded along, grateful for a distraction. The room thawed, slightly. Like someone cracked a window after too much smoke. Ben's story was absurd and forgettable, but it worked. Or at least it bought them time. Time to pretend nothing strange had just been said by the patriarch of the family. I didn't laugh. I watched my father. He sat perfectly still, cutting his food in clean, measured movements. His jaw worked a little harder than it needed to. He didn't look at me again. My mind was still in the moment before. The exact cadence of his voice. The certainty in it. He hadn't said it by accident. It wasn't a slip. It was a message. Not for the room. For me. I looked at him long enough to feel my throat dry out. But when he finally did glance up, it was brief, like brushing past a stranger on the sidewalk. No recognition, no curiosity, just blank dismissal. Ben's punchline landed with an exaggerated bang of the table. The room burst into laughter, forced, brittle, but loud enough to move on. I pushed my plate slightly away, appetite gone. Ben leaned toward me again. "You good?" he asked under his breath. Voice low enough only I could hear. "Seemed like Dad rattled you there." I looked at him, but his eyes weren't mocking. Not this time. They were watching me carefully, like he was measuring something, gauging whether I was ready to know something he'd been holding in reserve. "I'm fine," I said. It wasn't true. He nodded once, slowly. Like he didn't believe me, but wouldn't press. Not yet. Then he smiled wide, raised his glass again, and said to no one in particular, Isn't it nice to all be together? The dishes had been cleared, the wine was thinning out, and the family was starting to scatter, some moving to the living room to pretend to enjoy old stories, others slipping toward their coats and keys. I stood in the hallway by the stairwell, letting the noise blur around me. I didn't want to be part of whatever performance came next. Ben found me there. He didn't smile this time. He didn't joke. He just handed me a glass of bourbon and leaned against the banister, like he'd been waiting for the crowd to thin out. "You weren't supposed to be here," he said quietly, echoing the words I'd heard from my father hours earlier. Except, when Ben said them, they didn't sound cold. They sounded like a warning, or regret. I turned to face him. "What does that mean?" Ben sipped his drink. "There's a lot you don't know, man." He didn't make eye contact. "And trust me, that's not a bad thing. You being gone all this time? It might have kept things from getting worse." "Worse than what?" I asked, already tired of riddles. Ben glanced down the hall. The sound of Aunt Carol's laughter carried faintly from the parlor. "You were never supposed to come back," he said finally. "But now that you have—" He exhaled hard through his nose. "Maybe it's time." "Time for what?" I asked. "What are you talking about, Ben?" But he didn't answer. He just shook his head, the ice in his glass clinking softly. "Not here. Too many ears. Too many memories in the walls." "Ben," I pressed. "Don't do that. If you know something—" "I do," he said, cutting me off. His voice was firmer now, just for a second. "But it's not mine to say. You'll find it. Just don't stop digging when it gets weird." And then he was gone, walking down the hall like he hadn't just dropped a match in a dry forest. I stood there, bourbon untouched in my hand, the warmth of the glass not reaching my skin. Something was off. Not just with my father. Not just with this house. With everything. Whatever Ben wasn't saying, it wasn't just old family drama. It was something else. Something heavier. And I wasn't leaving without finding out what. The bedroom still smelled like it used to. Wood polish. Dust. Old linen that had been folded and forgotten. The posters on the wall bands I didn't listen to anymore had faded, their corners curling slightly, like they were trying to pull away from the past. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, staring at the bookshelf, unsure why I hadn't just gone to a hotel. The house creaked once. Then silence again. I wasn't tired. Not really. My mind wouldn't stop replaying my father's words. Ben's warning. I stood, started to pace. Halfway through the second lap of the room, I opened the closet more out of habit than curiosity. Shoes, a folded blanket, an old winter coat, and something behind the coat, tucked between a shoebox and the wall. A thin, battered notebook. Black cover. No label. The spine nearly worn through. I sat back on the bed and flipped it open. My mother's handwriting stared back at me. Slanted. Neat. Familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. January 12. He said the papers were final, but I don't trust him. The agreement never felt right. No context. No addressee. The next page was half a letter. Never mailed. If something happens to me, Ethan must know. Then it trailed off into a scribble. The ink had bled slightly. Water damage, maybe. Or tears. More entries followed. None of them complete. Pieces of a puzzle without edges. But two words kept appearing, sometimes underlined, always in isolation. The agreement. And once, near the back, underlined twice. Walter Kane. I didn't know the name. I was sure I'd never heard it before. But the way she'd written it pressed hard into the paper, as if trying to make the pen scream it meant something. I flipped back and forth through the pages, looking for a date, a clue, anything. The journal ended abruptly. No signature. Just one final line in all caps, scrawled messily. "Do not trust Alan with this." My father. I sat still, the journal open in my lap, heartbeat loud in the quiet room. Whatever this agreement was, whatever my mother had been afraid of, it wasn't just family tension, it was something darker, something buried. And now, somehow, it had started to surface. The coffee was already brewed when I came downstairs. My father was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, reading the paper like it was still 1998. The smell of bacon hung in the air, but there were no plates, just one mug. He looked up when I walked in, expression unreadable, not surprised to see me. Maybe he'd been waiting. "I found Mom's journal," I said without preamble. I didn't want to dance. Not with him. He didn't flinch, just set the paper down, and took a long sip from his mug. "That so?" She mentioned someone. Walter Kane. And the agreement. She said not to trust you. He didn't speak right away. Just looked past me, through the kitchen window, where snow was starting to collect on the hedges. Then, "Your mother kept things." I noticed. "She liked puzzles," he said, like it was a casual memory, not a dodge. "Always thought there were pieces missing in the picture, even when there weren't." "Were there?" His eyes finally met mine. Sharp. Cold. "You shouldn't be digging into this, Ethan." "Why? Because it makes you uncomfortable? Because it won't help anything. She's gone. Let it be." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "She didn't want me to let it be. She wrote that if anything happened to her, I needed to know." He stared at me for a long moment. Then, softer than I expected, he said, "Your mother should have burned that journal." The words hit like a drop of ice in my spine. Not because they were loud, but because they were honest. It wasn't a denial. It was regret. But not the kind that seeks forgiveness. The kind that resents being caught. He turned back to his coffee. That was the end of the conversation as far as he was concerned. But I understood now. There was something real. Something she tried to protect me from, even after she was gone. And my father, stoic, calculated, hollowed out by decades of silence, wasn't going to tell me the truth. Not directly. Whatever the agreement was, he was part of it. Maybe even the author of it. And now, without meaning to, he'd confirmed the worst thing a son could hear from a father. Your mother didn't trust me, and she was right not to. I called Ben that afternoon, told him about the journal, the name, the way Dad had reacted like it wasn't just history, it was a live wire we'd both touched. He didn't ask questions. Just said, "Give me an hour." We met at a diner on the edge of town, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress who knew everyone by their order. Ben had a folder in his hand, thick and bent at the edges. He slid it across the table without ceremony. I did some digging. I opened it. News clippings, legal filings, property records. Walter Kane, Ben said, stirring his coffee, used to own half the land north of the river. Back in the 80s, he was involved in a land trust scandal with a few other names you'd recognize, Alan Moore among them. My father. It was buried. No charges ever stuck. But money moved. Land changed hands fast. Your mom's name never showed up on anything, but I guarantee you she knew. Where is he now? I asked. Edge of town. Cabin off Old Mill Road. He doesn't talk to people. Doesn't even have a phone listed. I didn't hesitate. I drove out there the same day. The snow was ankle deep by then, tires crunching over gravel until it disappeared under drifts. The road turned to dirt, then to nothing. Trees leaned in from both sides, and for a second I wondered if I was walking into something I wouldn't walk out of. The house appeared suddenly through the trees, weather-worn, smoke curling from the chimney. I parked and walked up the path, heart in my throat. My knock was swallowed by the wind. The door creaked open 5 seconds later. The man staring back at me had a face carved from time. Gray stubble, hollow cheeks, eyes like he'd seen too much and forgotten too little. He looked at me for a long, silent beat. Then he said, "So, they told you nothing, did they?" I didn't answer. Didn't have to. He stepped aside without invitation, nodding me in. The door shut behind me like a vault. Whatever I was about to hear, it wasn't going to be simple. But it would be true. Walter's cabin smelled like cedar, smoke, and old paper. The wood stove crackled in the corner, throwing orange light across the floorboards. He didn't offer me tea or a seat. Just sat down in a worn armchair and gestured for me to close the door. I did. He looked at me like I was someone else. Maybe someone younger. Maybe someone long dead. Then he said, "I knew this day would come. I just didn't think it'd be you. I found your name in my mom's journal," I said, still standing. He nodded. "She always said you'd figure it out one day. Stubborn like her." I swallowed. "Figure what out?" Walter took a breath, long and brittle. "Your father and I, we weren't just business partners. We were quiet cleaners. You ever hear of the East River Land Trust?" I shook my head. It was supposed to be a conservation deal. Protect local farmland, blah blah. But we rigged it. Bought up property cheap from families who didn't know what they had, then flipped it through a shell company. Doubled the money, sometimes tripled. And my dad was part of that? "Your dad ran it," Walter said. "I just built the paperwork." I stared at him. "So what happened?" "Your mother," he said. "She wasn't supposed to know, but she did. She worked at the bank, remember? She saw the accounts, the names. She started asking questions. Got curious. Too curious." My throat tightened. "Are you saying?" Walter's voice cracked. "She found something she wasn't meant to. Documents that would have unraveled the whole thing. She told Alan she was going to turn it in. Said the town deserved to know. And?" He looked away. "And then, the car crash. That wasn't fate, Ethan. That wasn't weather or bad brakes. Your father told me she died quick, but I've never believed it." My stomach turned. He killed her. Walter didn't nod. Didn't speak. Just looked at the fire. Eyes glassy. "You weren't supposed to be born. Not then. Not after. Your mom found out she was pregnant the week before the crash. Alan told me that. He said it ruined everything." I felt the heat rise to my face. My legs trembled. "I kept quiet," Walter said. "But I left everything in a box. If I disappear, you'll know where it is. You should have told someone." "I am," he said. "You." The next morning, I drove back into town with my hands still shaking. I couldn't get Walter's voice out of my head, the way he'd said it. "You weren't supposed to be born," like I was a glitch in someone's blueprint. Not a son. A mistake. I pulled into Ben's driveway just before noon. His car was there. So was another one. Not his. It was parked across the street, angled like it had pulled in quick. Tinted windows. Engine idling. A figure behind the wheel. I paused halfway up the walk. The driver didn't move. Inside, Ben was pacing. "You were gone a long time," he said. "You look like hell." I told him what Walter had said. Not everything. Just enough. Ben didn't interrupt. Just poured us each a glass and stood by the window, peeking through the curtain. "That car's been sitting there since last night," he said. "No plates I can see. Think they're watching me? Or you? Does it matter?" We both knew the answer. I left after an hour. Couldn't sit still. Booked a room at a roadside motel on the edge of town under my mother's maiden name. That night, as I was brushing my teeth, someone knocked. One sharp rap. Then silence. I opened the door. My father stood there. No coat. No smile. Just that cold calm that used to shut down rooms. He stepped inside without asking. "You're making things harder than they need to be," he said. I didn't respond. Just locked the door behind him. He looked around the motel room like it offended him. Then back to me. "I know you spoke to Walter. He told me about the land deals. Did he tell you your mother was unstable? Paranoid? She thought we were stealing from the town. She thought you were in danger. She was right." He stepped closer. Voice lower now. "You have no idea how dangerous this gets. There are still people tied to this, Ethan. People with more to lose than me. That's end, R, end. I-R, end, R. Then maybe they should be afraid. He smiled, thin and sharp. You think this is about revenge? It's not. It's about survival. And you're walking into something you don't understand. I opened the door again. Then explain it. He didn't move, just looked at me for a long moment. Burn the journal. Let it go. Last warning. Then he was gone. I didn't go home after the motel. I went back to Ben's. He opened the door before I knocked, like he'd been waiting. His face looked older than it had 2 days ago. Tired. Guarded. He came to see you, didn't he? He asked. I nodded. Told me to burn the journal. Said this wasn't about revenge, it was about survival. Ben stepped aside. Then I guess we're out of time. We sat in the basement, this so-called office, lined with shelves of family crap, sports memorabilia, and an old treadmill that hadn't moved since 2015. He went to a filing cabinet near the back, unlocked it, pulled out a thick manila envelope. I wasn't sure if you were ready, he said. Didn't know if I was, to be honest. What is that? Everything, he said, setting it on the table. Land deeds, police records, letters, stuff Walter sent me years ago, stuff I found myself. I opened it and started flipping through documents with Alan's name all over them. Property swaps, inflated values, shell companies, letters from Walter to my father, warning him they were pushing their luck. One handwritten note in my father's script. Eliza is asking questions. We need to handle this. My mother's name, inked like a problem to be solved. You had all of this, I said quietly. And you didn't tell me? Ben leaned back. You think I wanted to drag you into this? You had a life. Away from here. A clean one. I wasn't going to be the guy who ripped the curtain open. I shoved the folder toward him. You used me. I protected you, he said, voice hard. If you had shown up here 5 years ago, still soft, still trying to get your dad's approval, this would have crushed you. But now, you're different. You're asking the right questions. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to thank him. I didn't either. Instead, I stared at my mother's name, circled on one of the letters. She'd known, fought back, died for it, and I'd been raised by the man who buried the truth. I closed the envelope, took it with me, and walked out. Ben didn't follow. It took 3 texts and a phone call to set it up. I told Alan I wanted to talk, clear the air. Told him I was tired, ready to let it go. He replied within 5 minutes. Tomorrow, noon, my office. He still called it an office. It was a study in the back of the house, with dark wood paneling and a locked drawer in every cabinet. I arrived 10 minutes early and waited in the driveway until noon on the dot. Inside, everything smelled like old varnish and silence. He poured us each a drink. Scotch? He offered. I accepted, then set my phone down face up on the side table, recording already rolling. He didn't notice, or didn't care. I've been thinking, I started, playing my role. Maybe I overreacted. He smiled. Slightly. You're not the first. I just need to understand. About Mom. About everything. He nodded slowly, sat back. You're looking for clarity. I respect that. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't go further, that he'd default to silence again. But then he said, Your mother was a good woman, but she was emotional, dramatic. She was scared. I said. She was reckless, he countered. She wanted to go to the police, over some paperwork and half-baked theories. It would have destroyed everything, everyone. So you stopped her. He didn't deny it. There was an accident, he said, eyes fixed on his glass. She took the car after an argument. Snow on the road. Lost control. But it wasn't an accident. He didn't speak for a long time, just ran a finger around the rim of his glass. I followed her, he said finally, to talk her down, calm her. But she wouldn't listen. She pulled over, screaming, waving papers, said she was going to the DA the next morning. I stayed still. She slipped, hit her head. I didn't push her, but I didn't call for help either. The words hung there, ugly and soft. I panicked, he whispered. She was already bleeding. It was cold. She would have died anyway. So I made it look like a wreck, rolled the car off the embankment. I kept my face neutral. You said she slipped, I replied. But you waited. You let her die. He didn't answer. My phone was still recording. Every word, every pause. I stood up. We're done here. His eyes flicked to the phone then, finally understanding. But it was too late. I played the recording for Ben in the same basement where he first handed me the envelope. We didn't sit, just stood there while my father's voice filled the room. Steady, cold, confessing. When it ended, Ben didn't say anything for a long time. Just rubbed his hands over his face like he was trying to wake up from a nightmare he'd learned to live inside. You sure about this? He asked. I wasn't, I said. But I am now. He nodded once, then walked over to his laptop and pulled up an encrypted site. I watched him upload the file, the full audio recording, plus scans of the documents we'd pieced together. No names, no traceable accounts, no author signature. Just the truth, delivered with surgical precision. Within 24 hours, it hit the local news. More family patriarch. Tied to historic cover-up. The word patriarch made me sick. Like he was some honorable elder caught in a bad moment. But the media kept going. The cold case, the staged crash, the forged documents, land fraud, whispers of obstruction. By the second day, the police came knocking. Ben called me before the news broke. They just took him out in cuffs. My father didn't struggle, didn't shout. According to the report, he just put on his coat, buttoned it all the way up, and walked out the front door like it was any other morning. Walter disappeared that same day. No note. No message. Ben drove to the cabin, found it empty. Still warm. Wood still burning in the stove. Gone. The town went silent, then loud. People who'd praised my father now talked in hushed tones. Others came forward, neighbors, former partners, even a few city clerks saying they'd always suspected something. The Moore name, once spoken with a kind of reverence, became something else entirely. Ben texted me a screenshot, the headline in bold above my father's mugshot. Justice. Finally. I didn't answer. Not because I disagreed, but because nothing about this felt like justice yet. Not when I could still hear her voice echoing in the silence. Not when the house that raised me now felt like a crime scene with wallpaper. The front door creaked louder than it used to. The hinges had always stuck in winter, but no one had ever fixed them. Funny, the things that survive a storm. I stepped inside the Moore house for the first time since the arrest. It was empty now. Quiet, in a way that pressed against your ears. Most of the furniture was gone, sold off, or boxed up by relatives who didn't want to be associated with the name anymore. The Christmas decorations were still in the hallway closet. I didn't open it. I walked through the rooms slowly, each one, a flash of memory I didn't want. My mother in the kitchen humming. My father in the study, behind closed doors. Me, standing in the hallway, always on the outside of something I couldn't name back then. Now I could name it. Silence. Fear. A pact no one dared break. I ended up in the attic. I hadn't planned on it. My feet just took me. Dust floated through the single beam of sunlight, leaking through the vent. I sat down by the old cedar chest near the back, the one Mom used to keep family photos in. I didn't open it. Instead, I noticed something else. Tucked behind a beam, a folded sheet of yellow paper, barely visible. My name was on it. Ethan. I unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear the fragile edge. Her handwriting. If you find this, don't be afraid to shine the light. Some truths don't need protection. They need exposure. You were never part of the plan. That's what makes you the one who can end it. I read it 3 times. Then a fourth. Her voice was right there, between the lines. Not just pleading, trusting. She'd known I'd come back one day. She'd left a trail because she believed I'd follow it. I folded the note and slid it into my coat pocket. Outside, the wind was picking up. I stood by the window, watching the bare trees bend with it. The house behind me felt hollow now, but something in me didn't. Not anymore. The podium wasn't where I expected to end up. Not after everything. Not after months of reporters at my door, lawyers circling like buzzards, and townspeople avoiding me in grocery store aisles. But when the local DA's office invited me to speak at a memorial fundraiser for families of cold case victims, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. The event was held in the community center gym. Folding chairs, cheap coffee, a table of framed photos, for the ones never found, never named, never avenged. I wore a suit that didn't quite fit anymore, and carried the folded note my mother had left, me creased from too many pockets, too many rereads. When they called my name, there was a pause before the applause, like everyone was waiting to see what I'd do. I walked up slowly, cleared my throat, and stared out at the rows of quiet faces. Some curious, some skeptical, some waiting for someone else to go first. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't need to. My name is Ethan Moore, I began, voice steadier than I expected. And for most of my life, I thought silence kept families safe. I thought protecting a name meant preserving love. I was wrong. No one moved. My mother was killed in what was ruled an accident. For almost 30 years, that's what we believed, because believing anything else would mean admitting that the people closest to us can do terrible things. And that's the hardest truth to face, isn't it? That evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. Sometimes it sits at your dinner table. A hush fell over the room. The kind that doesn't ask for sympathy but for understanding. We talk about justice like it's clean, I continued. Like it's something you hand over to men in uniforms or courtrooms. But sometimes, justice starts in the attic of your childhood home. In a forgotten notebook. In the decision to speak when everyone else wants you quiet. I paused. My mother left me a message before she died. It said, "Don't be afraid to shine the light." So I did. When I stepped down, people didn't clap right away. They stood, one by one. Not loudly, not performatively, just quietly, respectfully, like truth had finally been invited into the room. The video was online within an hour. By morning, it had gone viral. And for the first time since I'd come home, I didn't feel like a mistake. I felt like someone who belonged. This story was brutal. But this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.